Somehow I've escaped COVID so far. So, fingers crossed, right? Again, really inspiring to hear, obviously, Vinod. And then, I'm a huge fan of Girish, as all of you are. It's just a humble story. And it just reminded me when MR asked, what was the feeling when, to Girish when he was in NASDAQ? I remember watching him click the button. The feeling was like, I only remember his wife, right? I remember her in her pattisari. That's a proud moment. I mean, that's and looking forward to seeing all of those unicorns that's there, hopefully in the NASDAQ, and I can see those in saris as well. With that said, excited to welcome the group here. Maybe I know we're running out of time, so we'll start with quick round of intros. Maybe we can start with each of you and give you a Twitter style intro of your fund, how long have you been, and kind of your ties back to India.
Right. So my name is Guru. I'm with Lightspeed Venture Partners. We're a 20-plus-year-old tier one partnership with a global footprint today. We invest across sectors: consumer, enterprise SaaS, healthcare, frontier technologies, crypto, and we do that globally. So with feet on the ground here in the US, only in Europe, in Israel, in China, and then we've been in India since 2007 when we put feet on the ground with Bejul and Dave starting that practice. So at this point, going strong at about 15 years in India, and it's been an amazing journey. As a partnership, we are one partnership, so we are very, very collaborative and work very closely together. So for instance, you'll find companies and startups in India where Lightspeed US might have come in later. And so you might find, us sort of doubling down on some of our investments and helping them grow globally. And so that's a perspective I bring to the table. My personal journey started with Lightspeed a few years ago, so I've been here for about 3 years. I focus on our enterprise early stage investments out of the US, but I also work very closely with our India team.
Thank you.
Arun Matthew, I am a partner at Accel. I've been here since early 2009, and I helped to launch and run our growth practice here in the US. Our India team started and launched actually another fund that we sort of folded into Accel in 2008. And we're just really excited about this initiative in particular. Girish has been a huge supporter, and we've been able to participate, sort of educate the whole ecosystem about all the potential in India. We're big believers in SaaS in India, and I think it backed a number of really amazing companies, Freshworks included. And so really excited about all the activity that's going on over there.
Thank you. Deep.
I'm Deep. I work at General Catalyst, which is also a 20-year-old firm. We bring a different perspective to India. We bring the global perspective rather than having an Indian partnership or an India-focused only fund. We've been pretty active there for many years. My personal journey into India, started long ago when I used to run Asia Pacific for Google. In 2007, built all of the Asian R&D centers, including the one in India. Then I was the chief product officer at LinkedIn, continued my journey with India. So, earlier Priya was asking me about Internet 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I've experienced all three of them in India. Up close and personal, like Girish, I think I've generated thousands of jobs in India directly and indirectly, and very proud of that.
Yeah, and when Vinod was talking, he was talking about investors who take great company to a decent company. These excludes the three of them right here, just to clear the word. With that said, I think Girish talked about this, and we all talked about it in our prep call, about successes. Obviously, we have Golden Child, and the many more of Hasura Zero Joshi is here, and many more of the Postman, Trova, list goes on and on. Is this a repeatable success? Can we count on? I know there was some debate when you had that speech. Would love to hear your thoughts on, is this a repeatable template that we have going on, and how far can this go? Yeah, we'll start here.
Sure. So, context is really important when you answer a question like this. So, the question is, what is repeatable? And I always look to other examples. And one of the examples that we talked about earlier, and one of my favorite examples, is the example of how the Israeli tech ecosystem has developed over the years. So the question is, 10, 15 years ago, an entrepreneur in Israel will start a company, and you have to experiment with how do you sell into a global market, specifically a US market, and sort of grow the business from there. And it took about, 10 plus years for that ecosystem to get to a point where now it's almost a science. And a founder in Israel knows how to raise capital, how to build a go-to-market team, how to build a local product team, how to get their first customer, their second design partner, their third design partner, and then eventually grow to 100 million in ARR and potentially one day $1 billion in ARR. That kind of repeatability, I have not yet experienced in the Indian ecosystem, but it's certainly off to a great start. I think we're still in sort of that first third of the discovery phase of how do we take companies, and with amazing entrepreneurs like Garish and others, we're investors in companies like Hasura, we're investors in companies like Hubilo and others, which are, day one global. But I can't tell you yet that there's a repeatable pattern across. You can say, okay, let's take Freshworks and just stamp it out, and that's exactly how my journey is going to go. I think we're going to be in the discovery phase for a few years. Then we'll go to some level of repeatability. That's what I'm seeing on the ground.
That's a great point. Arun?
I sort of take the perspective that we're past product market fit and we're in the early stages of repeatability.
Yeah.
And I think the raw materials are certainly there. Look, I think if you look at what makes Silicon Valley successful, in my perspective, it's 4 elements and 4 sets of constituents. There are universities where there's a lot of really great academic research and a lot of really talented graduates that emerge that go into the workforce. There are really large companies that are producing successful products and are sort of the landmark companies in sort of a certain ecosystem. There is the capital, which all 3 of us have represented, that we're actively investing in India. And then there are the startups. And all 4 of those constituents exist in India today. And I think the proof for me is that we just had the first Indian company to go public. We are seeing the signs of really successful companies out there that are inspirational. I think all of us were raised in households where we were sort of told to go down the traditional path of medicine or engineering or law. And you talk to youngsters right now in India, and the role models are Girish and Sachin and Binny from Flipkart. And those are the people they look up to now. And so I think the whole mindset culturally, the dynamics and the raw materials to make really interesting businesses actually exist now, and they didn't exist even 5-10 years ago. So we are really bullish, I think, institutionally over the next 5 to 10 years.
That's great.
So, talking about entrepreneurship, in 2007, when we hired people at Google, we used to have a special selling tour, not for the candidates, but for their parents. We would give them a tour of Google. They'd be like, "Ye company chalegi ki nahi?" Like, who are you? And so we had to explain to them, we are publicly listed, it's worth so many crores or, higher than that, etc. And they still looked at us skeptically. And 2 years ago, the most searched term on Shaadi.com was entrepreneur. Okay. So India has come a long way, but, let me take a little bit orthogonal perspective to what Arun and Guru are talking about. What they talked about are all ingredients, and I think they're very important. But at the same time, I have the same ingredients in my pantry that Thomas Keller, the famous chef from French Laundry, has in his pantry at the restaurant. Except when he makes a pasta dish, he can charge you $50 for it. I can barely get my kids to eat my pasta dish. Okay. So ingredients are a necessary condition. They are not a sufficient condition. Okay. Starting a company or making it successful is both an art and a science. The science comes from the ingredients. We have our playbooks, how do you go about hiring people? How do you go about doing a whole bunch of things? But then there's a lot of black magic and art. No playbook talks about the first time you have a serious disagreement with your founder. No playbook talks about when your board member takes you behind the woodshed and gives you a rundown. Okay. The books only talk about the amazing relationships you have with everybody and how everything went well. Nobody talks about the first time your spouse looks at you and says, WTF, like, I never see you. Your kids don't know you are their father or their mother. You're always on the road. I've not seen a dime come in. It's been 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. Like, what are you doing with your life? Okay, nobody talks about that. That's where the real hard work of building success comes in. And that's not a playbook. That's an intrinsic part of our characters.
I see a lot of nods in the room So I think you guys all get what they're saying. With that said, I think a lot of innovations are happening. We talked about, I think, when Mana was talking about the opportunity of the Indian SaaS, global SaaS coming out of India. What are some of the innovations that, from your fund perspective, that you guys are interested to invest in? Where would you put your money in if you're investing in Indian SaaS company coming today?
You obviously, one of the things I always like to tell, I have a pair of socks that my daughter once gave me, and it has a bunch of dollar bills with wings. Okay. She's like, oh, you're an investor now, you should have these socks. And I looked at them carefully, and on one side, the dollar bills are going out. On the other side, the dollar bills are coming back in. And that's one thing you have to remember as entrepreneurs, as investors. The only businesses that anyone is going to be willing to fund for the long term is when dollar bills go out, but many dollar bills come back. So, what the socks don't have, which I think the next version should have, is the dollar bills coming back should be $100 bills. The ones going out should be dollar bills. One of the data points that Manav you shared suggested, $4 billion have gone into SaaS companies and 3.6 billion is the revenue. Not quite an efficient business, is it? That can't sustain forever. Now, I'm being a little bit facetious because that could be annual revenue and, it'll grow over time. All 4 billion are still in the bank. That's great. That's awesome, right? That's a good thing. That's good dry powder, as they like to say. But at the end of the day, look, we can pontificate like, oh, I love, AI-driven businesses. Very true, right? Nothing wrong with it. I think things like Copilot. So this is the other thing I tell people with young kids who send their, it's summertime, a lot of people are sending their kids to coding camps. I'm like, that's stupid because code will write code. Like, don't send them to do things that, in 10 years is going to become obsolete. Like, go send them to thinking schools because thinking will never get obsolete. But that's a side topic, right? Same thing, like open source software, huge deal, is going to be great. But at the end of the day, the best companies are formed with an amazing idea, an awesome team, and good capital. Mm-hmm. The first two are necessary and sufficient. The third one comes and goes, but you can figure that out.
How about you guys? Any sector that you would kind of?
I think Indian SaaS is riding all the same trends we're excited about globally. The move to cloud, customer experience. People are bringing their consumer experiences and expectations into the workplace. And I think they no longer want to use software that, we used 10, 15 years ago. I think it's a whole new paradigm. I think people are pulling in and using the type of software that they want to. Mm-hmm. I think bottoms up is working. I think product-led is a real movement. And I think Indian SaaS is riding all of that. I do think what is unique about India, and again, what gets me so excited, is that there is a structural advantage cost-wise to building in India. You get really incredible talent, and it is a fraction of the cost of what you have to pay Western talent. Like, you can't get away from that. And so if you are paying 50 to 60% of the cost in terms of product and engineering talent over there, and maybe you have go-to-market built in the US or in Europe, you're at a structural advantage. It's what allows you to serve a customer segment that may be overlooked by traditional players here in the US. It may be what allows you to scale in a more disciplined approach. But that structural advantage is what gets me most excited, because I think these businesses have an ability to be more naturally efficient and scalable than Western counterparts. And so I think the talent is just as good. And I think it's a really deep bench. So that is our belief.
And it's only getting better, right? By day.
Yeah, I'll just build on what Arun just pointed out. I think there's a couple of changes that have happened in the market over the last, they've been happening for a while, but certainly have accelerated in the last, I would say, 5 years, that makes us really bullish on SaaS out of India. The first one is the rise of, just call it the rise of open. So there's rise of open source, which is huge. And we've got companies like Azure getting built primarily started in India and then moving into the West. And I think you're going to see more and more of that. There's, somewhere between 5 to 7 million open source developers or contributors certainly based out of India right now. You can only imagine as that workforce, as those come, more strongly into the workforce, and then, want to become founders, want to start companies. I think that's a really interesting trend. The second one is, if you think about it fundamentally, what's the biggest challenge for enterprise SaaS companies out of India? For 20 plus years, we've had product built out of India to varying gradations, 20 plus years. Building product is not the challenge. We've got some of the best challenge on the globe within, the top probably 3 or 4 cities in India right now. The challenge is go to market. And the rise of PLG, to Arun's point, is something that is just, it's one of the largest tidal waves we're going to see that will help Indian SaaS. And so there's a propensity to first try and then buy increasingly in the US enterprise markets and global enterprise markets. And so the desire to call a local sales rep, get a rundown of the product, and then purchase is going down rapidly. They just want to try it online. And I'm sure companies like Freshworks have really benefited from this as well. And I think that's a second thing we're very excited about, because that enables an Indian SaaS company to push out the hard investments in go-to-market, coordination, building culture out here a little bit further along and get those initial design partners and get some initial traction. Very related to open source as well. That's the same reason why open source is exciting. And then the last reason is the structural advantage that Arun spoke about. There are certain classes of businesses where customers expect a high degree of customization or white glove support. And those two are very hard to build in a cost-effective manner out of the West. And so we have a company called Yellow Messenger, for instance. It's conversational AI. And if you really want to take advantage of conversational AI, you have to deeply, as an enterprise, as a customer, you have to integrate it with every single system in your environment. And what if you could do that at a third the cost based out of India, then you might do it here. So this is just a small tactical example of the kind of things that present a very unique opportunity for enterprise SaaS. So those three we're pretty excited about.
So I agree with the structural advantages that Guru and Arun are both talking about, but I would caution us. Okay, the structural advantage is transitory. When GDPs grow and productivity becomes better and societies become more affluent, that structural advantage goes away. I would go back and repeat what Girish said. He's like, let's not just ride a trend, let's shape it. Okay, if you really think ahead on what those trends are going to be, like imagine RPA. RPA was the hottest sector the last 3 years. Okay, the Indian IT company should have figured out RPA. Because what did RPA do? It basically dismantled their core business and said, look, you can't keep supplying these people. Like, why can't we just build these things ourselves and do it in a low code, no code fashion? The largest customers of RPA software now are Indian IT companies. That's dumb. It's backwards. Okay. They had a 20-year lead understanding what their customers around the world were using their people for. Why didn't they build the software for that? So take advantage of the transitory nature. That's like your bank balance, right? That's like giving you the time to think about what that next S-curve should be. And that's the only way we are going to be able to build those 10, 15, $20 billion revenue companies, not just market cap companies.
There's one thing I do want to point out. I think that's a really, really important point. And the question then, the natural sort of double click question becomes, why not? Why did these companies miss that trend? And I think just, I started investing in India as an operator in teams in India, much like you, very, very early. And I saw a consistent lack of product thinking for the longest time. And that's one additional thing I should have pointed out. The one thing that has changed in the last 5+ years is there's more product thinking there, right? My first company, we outsourced engineering to India. There was a whole bunch of engineers in Bangalore, and they were amazing. My second company, we outsourced engineering and product managers to India. So we had not, okay, let's move QA to India or some parts of development. We had QA, development, the technical marketing engineer, the product manager, the entire section. It was a unit, right? You either make profit or not. So that product thinking is growing. And I think that will prevent this replay of the RPA example. That's a great example. And I don't think we'll see that again out of India. Fool me once, shame on me, that kind of thing. But now there is product thinking, and I'm seeing some amazing, still not as much as I would like to, but I'm seeing some amazing product talent come out.
Yeah, 100% help.
And how does this tie back to hire? I mean, that just while you guys were talking about think big and don't think like for the next step, but for shaping it, right? What would be for the companies probably here and thinking about their first hire or the first big hire in US as they're taking their cross-border step? What would be the hire? Should they be thinking about product? Should they be thinking about sales? Should they be thinking about a combo, or how does that, what would that be as an advice from you guys?
Let me start.
I think it's very company specific.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
Girish is never going to hire the first product hire in the US. I think. I mean, Girish is a product guy.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think it would be different for a different organization. What you're going to hire. I do agree with Guru's point that I think product and engineering, product has made a lot of strides in India over the last 5 years. And engineering has always been solid. I think there's a deep bench of talent there that you can hire. I do think there is a lack of really scalable go-to-market experience in India, and depending on your sales model. And those are the areas, the people that have seen the journey from 100 to 1 billion in ARR, there aren't that many of them in India, especially for SaaS businesses. And so those CFOs that have taken companies public, which is typically what you would want, someone who has had that experience before to take you again, that's really hard to find in India. So I don't think of it as a first hire out of India, but you know, I do think there are some core capabilities when you reach a certain level of maturity that there's just not deep enough of the bench right now.
No, talking about valuations, I mean, we addressed in the last two panels. It's no secret that obviously the markets are not behaving that way that we would like it to, but that's universal, right?
You mean gravity should not exist?
It's going to happen. It's cycle. So we just need to stick together and keep our heads down and focus on what's needed. With that said, how does that impact a broader question? What do you guys think about recovery time, when we will get back to normal, and where do you think that normal is? Is it 2020 or 2021?
The one thing, and I've had the privilege of, helping take 2 companies public where I was an operator. And I still remember what we told our teams at LinkedIn the day we went public. We said, look, we had a great milestone today. It's like the wedding. Okay. The wedding's always fun. You have Sangeet, you have all kinds of amazing food, you have dancing, but the marriage is long and arduous after this. And what we have really signed up for here is the marriage, not the wedding. Okay. So our focus has to be on creating value, because that's what we control. The market will decide the valuation. And sometimes the market will be ahead of us and give us a higher valuation than we deserve. Sometimes it'll be behind us and give us a lower valuation than we deserve. You can't argue with the market. Mm-hmm. So right now we are in, as someone said, the fire and ice scenario, right? On one side, things are very hot. On the other side, things are very cold. You can't really tell what normal looks like. But again, going back to the Bezos letter, if your company has accomplished a lot more in the last 2 years or 3 years, and your valuation is below that time, take a long, hard look and say, you know what, if the fundamentals are better, clearly at some point, things will come back to it. But you have to sustain through it. And the biggest way to sustain through it is really not about the valuation or the market. It's really about your employee base. Because remember what I said earlier, great idea, awesome team. Well, by now, if you're a public company, you had the great idea, otherwise you would not be public. But your team can change anytime. You can go from awesome to not awesome when people start walking out of that door, or turning off those Zoom calls, right? So you have to keep them together. And how you do that is the true testament of leadership. That is really all founders do all day long. Everything else is handled by somebody else.
I totally agree with that. And I think you can only control what you can control, as simple as that. I will say, we looked at our almost 40-year history at Accel. And it's interesting when you look longitudinally across that time period, there is so much company value that's created during moments like these, because environments like these force a level of focus that candidly we saw slipping in our companies over the last 2 years. When money is easy and valuations are frothy and employees are feeling good and, they're getting offers left, right, and center and moving on from one company to another, it breeds a level of behavior that, I think is just a little bit loose. And so I think there is a silver lining to environments like this, especially if you're building and you're creating. And so I'm excited. I'm excited for the level of focus and discipline this is going to push. This is going to make everyone better. And I do think over time, the companies that focus on fundamentals and that focus on creating product value are the ones that are going to see and be rewarded over the time, and the markets are going to come back. We can all debate at what level, whether this is the new normal or whether 2 years ago was a new normal. I don't know. I don't think anyone knows, but I do think now is a really good time to build.
A follow on to that, Guru, talking about the fundamentals. I mean,
Right.
that was reinforced quite a few times. The discipline that, founders are going to get here. What are some of the metrics that matter the most while you're looking at a deal today? Is that anything that's different that you guys would be looking at more closely that matters versus what you had looked at a deal when it was like everyone is fighting for it?
So at Lightspeed, certainly our investment metrics do not change by market cycles.
Okay.
And this is especially on the early stage side. Growth is a little bit different. You have to be sensitive to where the public markets are. But on the early stage side, when we are doing a seed investment, series investment, whether that's in India, out of the Lightspeed India team, whether it's here, whether it's doing a series A into a Lightspeed seed in India, it doesn't really matter. The metrics, the KPIs, how we evaluate the business comes down to the same key 3 things. The market that you're playing in and why that market is interesting. What are the shifts in the market that enable you to build something interesting? The quality of the team, and then the unique wedge that allows you to be successful, right? So that hasn't changed. I will say this, the time that the kind of founder that succeeds in really rich markets is the same kind of founder that succeeds in really poor markets, and which is a founder that is extremely dynamic, and he or she can look at what the market is demanding, whether it's capital markets or employees or their customers, and they can very quickly pivot in and out of those operating KPIs, right? So there's nothing that is unique. It's not like, this is not really rocket science, but you just have to be sensitive to what the market demands. And I'll give you a real sort of example of that. The time that people buy fuel efficient cars is when fuel is expensive.
Yeah.
And, it's just a very natural thing. And when fuel is very cheap, then everybody goes out and does, who cares about that? Let me base my purchase decision on something else. So that kind of change happens. It comes and goes in the market. As a founder, you have to be sensitive to what's coming. And what is coming is an increased focus on efficiency and not necessarily growth, a better balance of efficient versus growth. There is no denying that. I think that's going to stay with us for many, many quarters. And so we've certainly recommended the founders in our portfolio to, in a way, take advantage of that, get ahead of that curve, make sure your business changes their operating strategy in a way to be more efficient over the next 1 to 2 years, and that'll bring them out even stronger on the other side.
How about you guys? Would love to hear kind of your thoughts there too.
Speaking very tactically, the 2 things that we really care about and are looking across our portfolio right now are efficient growth. And there are lots of metrics to sort of encapsulate efficient growth. People talk about the rule of 40, a combo of revenue growth and free cash flow, and combine that together. If that's above 40, that's obviously good. And that's a mature company. If you're a younger company, you should actually be a higher rule, maybe a rule of 60 or rule of 70. Whether that's magic number or a burn multiple, how much are you burning relative to the ARR that you're generating? But that concept of efficiency, I think, is really, really important, especially when capital markets are pretty frozen right now, and it's going to be hard to raise money, and you probably have to extend runway. So how much more efficient can you be with the dollars that you have? That's super important. And the other thing that we really are paying attention to right now is retention. Gross retention across segment, enterprise, mid-market, SMB, net retention, how are you expanding? And whether you're seeing, even if you're not seeing full churn, are you seeing attrition at all? And I think we're using it more as a judge of what your business model looks like. Are you exposed to a customer segment that is more recession prone? Or a little bit softer? Do you need to sort of focus on a larger segment to become more efficient and to get a little bit stickier in terms of retention? I think those 2, and again, we can talk after this, or I'm happy to, opine at all, but retention and efficient growth, I think are the 2 big metrics, I think, to really focus on during these periods.
Yeah, I would agree. Great advice from both my fellow panelists. The way I would sum it up is to say, look, the last 3 years were about the fundraising founder. The next 3 years are going to be about the operational founder.
That's a great point, actually. Thank you for sharing all those insights. Just on cash reserves, I know that question gets asked to us all the time because there's a huge inbound of debt requests that we get. So what are some of the advice that you guys are giving in terms of how many months of cash that founders should hold on to? Is there any guidance? I mean, not that I'm going to hold you guys to
as
that.
much as possible. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no, that's as much as possible, you
Yeah.
know, it's
You know,
just,
I keep hearing 18 months quite a bit. I don't know if that's like,
You know why that happens, the 18 months thing, or two years or whatever it becomes, is because it feels far enough in the future that you're like, by then life should get better, right? I mean, it's the same reason, like, you know, you agree to go somewhere like 3 months from now, you're like, yeah, my calendar will be open. And then that week comes and you're like, why the hell did I agree to this, right? Like, you know, resonates. That's why the 18-24 thing. I mean, if Jerome Powell and Janet Yellen don't know when the recession may start, let alone end, who are we to sit here and say 18 months of cash will be fine? Don't worry about it. It's as much as you can have.
they probably spent hours on their projections to keep 18 months of cash. Now you know why. But
You know, an interesting observation in our portfolio, at least, is that the vast majority of our companies, you know, 85-90% of our companies across early stage and growth, use the last 2 years to fundraise really effectively. And the vast majority of them have more than 24 months, oftentimes more than 36 months of runway. So they're fine on cash. There was a lot of cash pumped into startups. But they also raised at pretty extraordinary valuations relative to today's market. And so that's the question. For those companies that don't need to raise, they don't have to raise. They're going to run the clock out. But are they ever going to be able to get to the last round? Are we ever going to be in an environment like that? And I think that's the looming question for the industry, you know? And so you got to have enough cash. I think a lot of companies are actually going to be okay and are going to get a lot more efficient, but there's going to be a reckoning in terms of value at some point.
thank you.
And cash is revenue minus costs. Everyone's focused on cost reduction to get to the magical 18 months. What happens if revenues go down and you don't hit your projections? That 18 may become 12. But let's say you have 18 months, but you don't fundraise the day before you run out of cash. That means you start fundraising 9 months prior. And now all of a sudden things don't look that great, right?
Great point. I bet there's a ton of questions in the room. We have like 7 minutes. So any questions? Go ahead. Please introduce yourself before asking.
How much focus you guys put on culture, and if you indulge me, how do you evaluate culture when you're looking at an organization that's in the early stages of raising capital?
Culture starts at the top, and I think it requires, and it's just in our business, I think that's why the last 2 years have been really challenging, actually, from my perspective, because it's been really hard to spend quality time with the founders, meaningful enough to sort of get a sense of how they operate and run the business and get a sense of how they run the company. But these are long-term relationships. And so what we do is we spend a lot of time with the culture, or sorry, a lot of time with the founder and the exec team, because I think the culture is set by them. But you're right. You know, when we have a pitch deck, we put that slide on culture matters first, because we do find almost a 1-to-1 correlation between the most successful companies we back and the culture that they serve. And, you know, I think that has been really important over the last 2 years to attract talent, especially when there's been a lot of choice, but it's super, super important.
Right. Any question? Oh, go ahead.
My question is, so my name is Deep. You mentioned that for Indian ecosystem, there's probably a certain lack of product. Can you break that down? What do you exactly mean? Vision, UX, design?
It's a great question. So my comment was there was a lack of product thinking, which is what hindered sort of the growth of, which is what led to things like missing the RPA movement and hindered the growth of enterprise SaaS. And my observation has been in the last 5 to 7 years, that has changed dramatically. To address your question, the issue was a very tactical problem you would have teams in India for global, or let's say dually based companies that are based in the US and also in India. You would have engineering based in India, and you would have the product managers and product marketeers and more of the go-to-market functions and the GM sitting out in the US. The good thing that happened was starting about, I would say, mid-2000s, 2005, 2010 onwards, there are a number of go-to-market executives that moved back over time, product thinkers who were thinking not just about exactly how to build the product, but why to build the product. It is really that it's not about UX, it's not about UI, it's not about the exact feature set or the roadmap. It's asking that distinction between how to build versus why to build. And that has really changed dramatically, because these are the same PMs who built those products here in the 2000s that might have moved back to India in the 2010s, or PMs that might have always been in India, but ended up working for companies like LinkedIn and Google, which were among the first to move actually product functionality back into Bangalore and other cities. So that's what I meant. These folks who are focused on asking why rather than asking how.
And I mean, as a lifelong practitioner of product management, what I would say is that it's an apprenticeship job. This is not something you learn from textbooks. You don't just learn by reading about it. You don't just learn by observing. You have to do it along with really good practitioners of that art. And, it wasn't until people started moving back, or people from, India would come here, work for a few years, then go back, etc., that they started learning how to do it. So I taught a very popular class on product management at Stanford for many years. And the reason it was so popular is we didn't do lectures, we actually did hands-on training. So for 3 hours every week, for 13 weeks in a row, students would get together in a class and they would build things, and we would teach by doing. And that's a very difficult thing to do if you haven't ever done it.
Awesome. Just one final question to you all, just to close this out. Manav highlighted that there's a $1 trillion creation opportunity for SaaS from India. What is your advice for the founders in the room? Could be part of those people who are making those value creation. What is one advice that you all would give the founders to help us get there?
What I would say is think about value creation, not the valuation. I think the $1 trillion is a valuation number. And I'll share a story from the early days of Google. So after a board meeting, Larry Page and John Doerr were talking. John Doerr, still is on the board as one of the earliest investors in Google. And Larry said to John, he's like, John, do you think we can get to 10 billion? And this is when, Google had a few hundred people had maybe reached 100 million in revenue or something like that. And John said, sure, 10 billion in valuation. Yeah, I think, Larry, we can get there. Larry is like, no, I mean 10 billion in revenue. Okay. That's the real metric. That's what we should think about. So there are only 15 pure play SaaS companies in the world that do more than 2 billion in revenue. Be in that club. That's what you aspire to be.
Why don't you go first?
No, yeah.
So I'll say something pretty tactical that certainly has stayed true in all of my work in India, which is, if really the aspiration, and it's the right aspiration, by the way, I think everything is up for grabs. Let me just say two quick things. Every part of the market is up for grabs. There's nothing that is out of reach. It's only a question of doing it the right way, having that aspiration, which brings me to the tactical sort of recommendation, which is think global day one. The issue sometimes, I love Girish's last comments on the Indian market. India is a sword that can cut you both ways. There's enough of a local market that's very tempting for an early stage founder to say, let me get my first 5 Flipkart's there, Reliance is there, there's this, that. Okay, great, I can get 5 design partners in India. Don't do that. Think global day one. Get global customers, work with them. If you set the foundation right, nothing is beyond the reach of enterprise SaaS companies coming out of India.
Great advice.
My only advice is be authentic and self-aware about what your competitive advantage is in a global world and a global market. And I think you have to have a clear view on what that is. Are you a better product thinker with a clear knowledge on a specific market that better than anyone else in the world? If you are, great, build in that category. If not, go somewhere else and learn it. Become an apprentice. Maybe you do something outside of SaaS, because to Guru's point, everything is up for grabs, even not just SaaS in India, every market. Maybe you want to build a B2B marketplace. There's a lot happening in India, but be authentic to yourself and try and understand what your specific competitive advantage is.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing incredible insights. Let's give a round of applause. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.